To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. Roses are red, violets are blue, but is the experience of colors the same for me and for you? If you were raised in a culture with English as your first language, calling one shade blue and another green might seem like a no-brainer. But it does take brains and cultural knowledge to do that. See, if you are part of the Beremo community in Papua New Guinea, both of these colors would actually be called null, a color category that includes most of the shades that an English speaker like me would call green and blue. It even covers a couple of shades of purple. This means that two people might take in the exact same wavelengths of light, but their interpretation could be completely different. It's not just a matter of having different words for things. When given a memory test, Bermo people often confuse two shades of null, while the British participants sailed right through the same part of the test since they could distinguish the shades as green and blue. But British participants didn't do well in a part of the test that involved shades of null and war, a color distinction that doesn't exist in the English language. So while our senses are an amazing and essential part of our lives, they're not a feed of raw information about the world around us. Sensory information is processed by the brain, and it's processed differently by, different brains. And that means although we share the same world, we each interpret it differently. I'm Deja Fitzgerald, and this is Study Hall, Intro to Psychology. The information we get or don't get from the world around us shapes our experiences, from how we differentiate colors to our emotions and reactions to events like finding out in my late 20s that I'm particularly good at telling the difference between blue and green. So as psychologists, we can learn a lot about people when we know how this information actually gets to us, which happens in two parts. Even though we often use these words interchangeably, sensation and perception have different definitions. Sensation is what's happening when specialized cells gather certain information. For example, if the specialized cells in your ears respond to high-frequency sound waves, you're sensing a noise in your environment through the sense of hearing. And perception is what's happening when that information is organized and processed. So when your brain processes the sensory information your ears are taking in, and you realize it's a fire alarm and you need to hightail it out of there, that's perception. So we all have sensory experiences that involve sensation and perception, but they can both vary quite a bit from person to person. Like, we all know someone who can't stand the taste of cilantro, and being unable to tell the difference between red and green is really common. Both of these are biological differences between people, but like the Beremo community shows us, these differences don't have to be based in biology. An easy way to think about how we sense the world is that sensation is more biological and perception is more psychological, though it's not quite that black and white. But let's talk about how sensation and perception work separately before we talk about the gray area. Though each sensory system is unique, they all essentially do the same thing: change information from the physical world into signals the brain then processes. So if you're visiting a friend in Hiroshima or are about to dig into some okonomiyaki at a summer festival, you're getting a bunch of different sensory information. But all that information ultimately comes down to cells sending signals to the brain. Like when you look at your steaming veggies and noodles pancake, you're using the visual system, which consists of the eyes and related parts of the central nervous system, like the optic nerve and the visual cortex. Light from the world around you enters your eyes, and different parts of them interact to focus the light. Then special cells called rods and cones turn the light into signals. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul, but they're also sort of the windows for the brain. Now, take the auditory system, which consists of the ears and parts of the nervous system like the auditory cortex of the brain. When your friend tells you to dig in while the okonomiyaki is piping hot, cells in your inner ear, way beyond your eardrum, called hair cells, move in response to the sound waves made by your friend's vocal cords. This movement results in signals that get sent to our brains through a special part of the nervous system called the auditory nerve. We also have sensory systems that work through interactions with molecules. That's what's going on with the olfactory system, which makes our sense of smell possible with the nose and olfactory tract, a bundle of nerves that connects to specific regions of the brain. When you lean over your steaming food and inhale its aroma, cells in the nose interact with odor molecules to produce, signals that go to the brain by way of the olfactory nerve. And if you've ever tried eating your favorite food when you've got a bad head cold, you know how important that sense of smell is to your sensation of taste. That's because the olfactory system is closely related to the gustatory system, which enables our sense of taste and includes the tongue and gustatory cortex of the brain. When you take a bite of okonomiyaki, special cells in your taste buds respond to molecules in that warm mouthful of cabbage, sprouts, noodles, and sauce. Those cells will send signals to your brain that lead to the taste of sweet, salty, bitter, sour, or umami. And of course, you're holding that warm styrofoam container in your hand. The feel of that warmth in the container is a sensation that you and I will call touch. But other people refer to it as the somatosensory sensation, which is part of the somatosensory system or our fifth sense. Think of the somatosensory system as the way our body interprets sensory information from the very exterior bits of us. Things like pressure, temperature, and pain. It also includes proprioception, or the physical awareness of where your body is in space. And when it comes to movement, we have a specific part of proprioception, the vestibular sense. Thanks to the vestibular sense, we can hold our heads up correctly, balance when walking, and even focus our eyes on things in motion. The vestibular sense is kind of our sense of gravity, and it's made possible by structures in the inner ear. What we feel with our somatosensory system varies across the body, and part of this is because the map of our body that lives in our cerebral cortex, the somatosensory homunculus, is not at all related to Voldemort or what our body actually looks like, which is probably a good thing, because if that were the case, it would kind of look something like this. It's kind of terrifying. Basically, the more sensitive an area of your body is to touch, the more space your somatosensory cortex devotes to it. This is why a paper cut hurts more than you think. There's so much more brain processing power devoted to your hands. And there are still more senses, like interoception. That's the sense we use to gather signals from inside the body. There are lots of body processes that we can pay attention to if we focus, like our heartbeats, internal temperature, or even the stomach rumbling. Once sensory information reaches the brain, it's translated through a process called transduction into sensations that we feel. And when the information is processed, then we have perception. Perception is biological too, since it involves cells sending signals. But we can think of perception as psychological because it's shaped by many factors, including your background, culture, language, and worldview. As we saw with the people of Brunmo, the names we learn for colors can affect our perception of colors. And this biological and psychological combination completes our perception. Whether it's colors or sounds or some other sensation, the way we process sensory information can be divided into two types. The first is called bottom-up processing, and it represents how perception is built on information from our senses. Like when you take the first bite of a new food, you're taking in the way it tastes and smells to figure out if you like it. But we also use top-down processing, which is when prior knowledge influences how we perceive something new. Maybe you've never tried Vegemite before, but when you eat it, it reminds you of eating another type of salty spread that you really didn't like. So the similarity is affecting what you think of the Vegemite. So our senses are more complex than just a raw feed of information about the world. We also have to organize this information in our minds. We need both sensation and perception to understand the world. So let's dig into that gray area between sensation and perception, because one doesn't always straightforwardly lead to the other. Imagine I stimulated your sense of touch by tickling your arm very gently. So gently that it only registers in your brain part of the time. The sensation is always there. I'm always tickling you, and the cells in your arm are taking in the information, but it's not always perceived. That's in part because our brains limit what sensory information we perceive, which is a good thing. If you think the open plan office is already a nightmare, imagine if we were aware of all the things our senses picked up in that environment. Every cough, every Slack ping, total information overload. To study the relationship between sensation and perception, researchers use something called absolute threshold, which is the smallest amount of stimulus that we can register 50% of the time. For consistency when doing research, we use detecting a stimulus 50% of the time for the definition of absolute threshold. Like we said though, the sensation is always happening. So when a stimulus doesn't cross the absolute threshold, we call it a subliminal message. And even though we're not aware of it, there's some evidence that subliminal messages can affect our thoughts. Researchers are investigating just what kind of messages can affect our thoughts and for how long. Then there are times when sensation does become perception, but we misinterpret the sensory stimuli. We call these mismatches between sensation and perception illusions. Even though optical illusions, like the vase with faces or the blue-gold dress of internet yore, seem to get all the attention, illusions can involve different senses, or more than one. For example, look closely at my mouth and try to guess what sound I'm making. Ba, ba, ba. Did you hear da, da, da? Most people do. Okay, now this time, close your eyes, no peeking. Ba, ba, ba. Did you hear ba, ba, ba this time? Now, let's try one more time. This time without sound. Did you see ga, ga, Oh, sorry. Did you see ga, ga, ga? Here's the thing. You might have heard or seen the words differently depending on what kind of stimulus your senses were getting, but the actual audio and video never changed. This is called the McGurk effect. It's an illusion that occurs when the visual component to one sound is paired with the auditory sound of another word, leading you to perceive a third word entirely. Basically, your senses are at war with one another, and your brain has to sort out the contradictory information it's getting from your eyes and ears to make sense of what's going on. The McGurk effect is an example of how illusions are more than just interesting tricks. By studying them, researchers can learn more about how our senses work, and that's important because, as we've discussed, the senses don't work the way we might assume they do. It also shows us that our senses don't exist in isolation from one another, and that while our brain is always receiving sensory information, we can't always trust if or how we're perceiving that information. Sometimes our senses seem completely infallible, like they're bringing us the true reality of the physical world, but our senses are nothing without our prior experiences, culture, language, and identity. And our senses, of course, have their limitations. The way you sense the world may seem incredibly natural and intuitive, but it's the result of extraordinarily complex processes that might play out differently for other people. The reason you think green is green and Vegemite tastes terrible is because of your senses and the way perceptions are organized in your brain. Different people's brains create different sensory experiences, and the way we experience sensory information can change over time, too. So, the next time you wonder why your friend chose to wear a fuchsia turtleneck with violet corduroys, keep this in mind. Maybe those colors don't clash for everyone. And if you're enjoying Study Hall, Intro to Psychology, and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, go to GoStudyHall.com or click on this button to learn more. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.